What are you afraid of? Most people have a list, and maybe it's a short list, maybe it's longer. For me, I've mentioned that, roller coasters in another of these video blogs, and I could ride any roller coaster. Those don't really affect me at all. But get me on a Ferris wheel, and especially at the top, and maybe it slows down or stops. When I look over, that's when I get a knot in the pit of my stomach. Well, what should we be afraid of as Christians? Should we ever be afraid? This idea comes up in Mark chapter 4. It's the account of Jesus calming the storm. Jesus and the disciples had gotten into a boat and they were heading across the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus had fallen asleep. Well, after he'd fallen asleep, a storm arose, a very severe storm, and the boat began to fill with water. His disciples, some of whom were fishermen and had seen storms like this and had seen the effects, they go to Jesus and wake him up and say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" Well, Jesus speaks to the wind, the waves, and calms the storm. And then he speaks to the disciples. And he says to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And that shows us that this idea of being afraid and having faith are opposites. And you'll hear me say all the time that faith and sight are opposites because the Bible tells us we walk by faith, not by sight. Well, how does this fit? Think about it. What were they afraid of? What they saw, the wind, the waves, what they had seen in terms of past storms and what it did to ships and the people on them. And so this idea of faith versus fear is they were afraid of what they saw. And so the two do go together. Well, he asked the question then, have you still no faith? That tells us something about faith. It shows us it's a process. Have you still no faith? In other words, when you first started following me, I could understand, but you've been with me now. You've seen all these things. Have you still no faith? The faith, and it's not so much the faith that we have as acting out of that faith, is a process. Jesus, he knew in one sense, but he's saying to them, you should be farther along by now. That also tells us that faith is based on evidence. You'll often hear faith is the opposite of reason. Absolutely not. Why does he think that their faith should be at a different point here? Because of what they've seen. What they've seen God do in him and through him. They should have more. It's based on that evidence. Well, faith for what? Have you still no faith? And if you look and study this, a lot of people say, well, faith that he's the Son of God. They should have had faith, should have believed that by now. I don't think so. One thing about the Jews that set them apart from all the other nations, especially after the exile, is their monotheism, their belief in one God. It's what was always present in Judaism. They got away from it at times, but at this point, they are committed to it. And so it would not be easy to convince them that Jesus, and not to mention trying to understand the Trinity, convince them at this point that he was God himself, the Son of God. So I don't think that's what it is, but if it's not that, what is he saying? Have you still no faith in what? I think he's talking about God's plan. What had they seen? Well, up to this point, they had seen Jesus. One, they'd seen John the Baptist, or were certainly aware of him, and the fact that he's a prophet. And then he talks about one who's coming that is greater than I, and reveals that it's Jesus. And you have the voice of God at Jesus' baptism. You have all the miracles that he has done. And the key thing, you have his message, and it tells us the heart of his message is the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of God is here. It's near. And so if the disciples are with him and they've now come to realize that they have a key part in that, they're his inner circle. Well, think about it. What had they seen? They'd seen all that, but what they haven't seen is the kingdom yet. And especially for them, they at this point misunderstood. They thought it was going to be a physical kingdom. And for that, Jesus was going to have to overthrow Rome. Well, they weren't even close to that. And so I think he's saying, have you no faith that God's going to do what he said he's going to do? What I've been saying as his clear messenger that God is going to do. And so as we think about that, well, that tells us that when we face a situation, we can have faith in God to do what he plans to do. Now, the difference is we don't always know what he plans to do. You'll hear me talk about faith that versus faith in. Today, faith that is very popular. You'll hear Christians say, I have faith that God is going to do this, or I believe that God is going to do this. The problem is, God hasn't said He's going to do it. And so if I'm the one who comes up with, I've got faith that He's going to do something, that's me telling God what to do. Sign here, God, on what I've said I want. No. Now, I do believe God does reveal some things that He wants to do in us and through us, for sure. God makes it clear. Now, usually He doesn't make everything clear, though. Especially, He doesn't make the how, maybe exactly the what, and certainly the when clear. I think of myself and I think of this ministry. Everything began to come together, and it's a great story of God's providence to everything come together for this ministry. Well, it was January of 2016 that it all came together and said, this is what I want to do. God's leading me to do this. Well, I thought it was going to come together much sooner. Certainly by about September, October of 2016. But no, it wasn't until August of 2017 that I launched Looking Intently. Now, I look back and I see the reason for what at the time seemed like a delay. God, why is it taking so long? But that just shows God revealed, okay, here's what I want you to do. But boy, not how, or certainly not when. And so I can only have faith to the degree that He reveals what that is, what I should have the faith for. But the other side of faith is not just faith that God will do something, it's faith in God. When you go through the Bible, the New Testament, that's what you're going to see. Faith in over and over and over, which means I just have faith in God. The key things, He's in control and He loves me. I don't know the details, and that's part of the faith. I want to know. God, tell me. No, have faith in me. And that means I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't have to be afraid because I have that faith in God, that He's in control and He loves me. And you know what? As we talk about God's plans and following them and being committed to them, well, when God does reveal a plan, I guarantee you there will be an opportunity to be afraid, because that's the kind of plans that God reveals. They're that big, that audacious, and they have that many obstacles in their path. And so then I will be faced with that choice. Am I going to have fear or have faith? And you know what? I might have both. I might have some faith and some fear, and then the real key is, what do I act out of? Do I act out of the faith or act out of the fear? That's what counts. And there's certainly everything there that we can know, we can trust, we can see what God has done in the Bible and hopefully our own lives to know there's plenty of reasons to be afraid, but I can have faith in God. Don't know all the details, but that doesn't matter.